Hey everyone, hope you're all well. This one's a little bit different. It's going to be a review of a TV show, Designated Survivor. I don't often do this. I occasionally do film reviews, but um, actually I can't remember when was the last time, if ever, that I've done a review of a TV show. And here it is. Um, Basically, I've been watching this for about the last half year on Netflix. I've had Netflix accounts on and off, but yeah, I decided, okay, I'll check out something new, and I read the synopsis, so okay, this might be intriguing. The basic premise of Designated Survivor, and I'll get into the cast um, and some of the characters in a minute. Um, there will be spoilers in this if you haven't seen the show, so perhaps you can listen to my intro about the premise and then cut off there because I will be talking about some of the episodes and how I felt it played out in the end. Um, Overall, I'd say it was a good show. I'd say it was very watchable, and I watched the whole way through overall. But I will say that by series three, I definitely think it had declined. The premise was good, though. It was interesting. The premise was that during the President's State of the Union, um, the initial president makes a very, very brief appearance in archival footage. This is a fictional president. During his State of the Union, there's a massive terrorist attack, and there's a presidential line of succession, just as we have a royal line of succession. There's a presidential line of succession that, in the event of a major event like a terrorist attack, there has to be someone in charge. So, the designated survivor is usually a member of the cabinet who's put aside during big state events such as an inauguration, a State of the Union, and other big events, so that there is a continuity of government in the event that the entire cabinet is wiped out. And it basically explores that premise. And we have Tom Kirkman, played by Kiefer Sutherland. He is the Secretary of Urban Housing, so relatively minor cabinet secretary. We're not talking about a Secretary of State or a Vice President or a Speaker of the House. We're talking about a mid-ranking cabinet official. And he finds himself suddenly thrust into the position where he's effectively the President of the United States. And earlier in the day, he'd actually been demoted. So, as an intro, that was a very interesting concept. I think the premise is very good. I mean, it definitely makes for good material. Just as a matter of record, there was no designated survivor at Trump's second inauguration, so they're obviously not always used. The last one that is named, according to Wikipedia, was Miguel Cardona, who was the Secretary of Education, and he was the designated survivor during Joe Biden's last State of the Union in 2024. So anyone with, eagle eyes would be looking around and say that Miguel Cardona was not there. So the designated survivor will be at another location just in the event that that happens. In Britain, actually, members of the royal family never all travel together. There's always one left over, so there's always an heir to the throne. So it's a similar principle. I'm not sure if the government here has such a concept as a designated survivor, but certainly I don't think there would be a situation where the entire cabinet will be in one place at once. Um, I don't think you'll have a situation where the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary will all be travelling together for ostensibly a similar reason. Now, Kiefer Sutherland was great. I thought his casting was very good. Admittedly, I didn't know him that well as an actor before Designated Survivor. I was familiar with him from obviously his father, famous father, Donald Sutherland, but I also knew him from Stand By Me. I knew him as the tyrannical Roman governor in the film Pompeii, which I think is an underrated film. Um, so I was only loosely familiar with him as an actor. I thought he was excellent in this role. He's a very empathetic character. He's someone who, you sort of see him as a relatively ordinary man who's suddenly thrust into this massive responsibility. And there's times he's stubborn, he's flawed. He can be quite quick tempered, he can be stubborn, but he's also clearly quite conscientious and he fundamentally comes across as a decent man. You know, he's hard to really dislike. So I think Kiefer Sutherland carried that very well, which shows his merits as an actor because in Stand By Me he was an awful character. Um, so you know, any actor who has the ability to both get you to like them and to hate them has ability as an actor. Um, Natasha McElhone plays his wife, the First Lady. She suddenly becomes First Lady. And some of the other cast, Italia Ricci, which I think is a wonderful name, she is his assistant as Secretary of Housing, and suddenly she becomes a senior White House staffer and one of his main advisors, Al Penn, who interestingly enough has real life White House experience. He was in the Obama administration. He plays another senior White House staffer. In fact, he's the presidential spokesman. And there's a good scene in the first episode, again, spoiler here, where Kirkman is sort of in the restroom, kind of taking his breath and letting it all sink in what has actually happened. And this guy, Cal Penn's character, starts talking to him, Seth Wright, I think he's called, saying, "What do you think of this new guy who's the president? He's got no experience." He's basically berating him. And then Tom Kirkman comes out, and suddenly he thinks, "Whoa, I am talking to the president now." And he says, "Do you really mean everything you've just said?" And I just think it's a good scene. So, Designated Survivor has some memorable scenes. Now, other people, I should say, let's see, we have Edding Panto, another senior White House advisor. He, sadly, the actor died quite young. He's a prominent Mexican actor. He died just in his 40s of cancer, I believe. Maggie Q has an important role. She's an FBI agent investigating this terrorist atrocity. And it turns out, again, spoiler here in the first series, that the man tipped to be the vice president is actually behind it, or he's one of the figures behind it. Um, who else do we have? Um, those are some of the main casts. There are others that I will come to. Now, I will say this about Designated Survivor. The first series, especially, to a lesser extent, the second series, I felt that the writing was good in the sense that you had topical plot lines for each episode that kept that kept you watching as a viewer. And these were dramatic things, but there were plausible things. I mean, things that could potentially happen. There was issues of, tracking down terrorist cells. There was issues of immigration tensions, as of course we're seeing right now. Um, there was issues around, uh, for example, executive power versus state power. Um, so Designated Survivor got into all that stuff. And what I liked about it was it didn't avoid the culture war issues. There was left-right dynamics going on there. I mean, I will say this: Tom Kirkman, incidentally, is an independent. He's neither a Democrat or Republican. He's deliberately serving as an independent. But I will say that overall, I should say the series was written by David Guggenheim. Overall, there's definitely a left-wing tilt in Designated Survivor, as there probably is in most Netflix productions. Um, I never watched West Wing, so I don't know if that had a left or right wing angle. But Designated Survivor definitely has that left wing angle. Now, in series one, season one, and season two, that wasn't really a distraction because it was done in a subtle enough way. For example, you have Kirkman ordering the arrest of the governor of a Midwest state, I think it was Ohio, on the grounds that he was imposing anti Muslim legislation. So Kirkman saying, this is violating the civil rights. But then you have moral questions because Italia Rich's character has to lie to him to get him on a flight to kind of negotiate with Kirkman. And then you find out he's been lied to. Well, that's not exactly playing chess fairly. So there are some times where it shows the executive power, although Kirkman's a decent figure, it shows that there's times he also has to not be morally compromising necessarily, but certainly make difficult decisions. And yeah, perhaps sometimes that does get into moral questions. What Kirkman comes across as is really ideological and often putting values above real politics, which means that his domestic rivals and critics see him as something of an amateur out of his depth. So in that sense, I thought it was good writing. Um, and there's a lot of action in it. You know, Maggie Q, particularly as an FBI agent, she's like a one woman, action girl. She gets into all sorts of scripts, and I think she was good at the role. I know some people have criticized her as a character, saying that she made foolish mistakes, but I found her engaging. I liked her as a character. Um, there's one storyline, for example, where she gets close to a British agent who turns out to be something of a double agent working partially with the Russians. There's a whole storyline with that. Um, so first and second seasons, I thought they were well done. And yes, there were left wing angles, but like for example, there was an episode about gun violence, about Joe Kirkman having to make the compromised position of I believe in the Second Amendment, but we have to do something about the violence against our children. So it's getting into those nuances of the left-right debates that the United States does see. Now, in season three, which I've just finished watching, I really do think it went downhill. The action was all right, but there were too many new characters introduced. Now, I know in any production you're going to have actors getting other commitments. For example, the First Lady's character was killed off in the end of season two, which was quite a dramatic thing. Um, Jeff Pearson, I didn't mention him. He plays the former president, Cornelius Moss, who is someone that Tom Kirkman looked up to, but eventually they become quite bitter adversaries. Um, so he's an interesting character. Um, Jimmy Clayton, who is a real life trans actor, plays the president's trans woman sister. Now, this, along with the character of Isabel Pardo, were two of the reasons why I feel that season three really went downhill. Um, Jimmy Clayton's character, like I say, is a trans person. Now, that's okay. That's something that's in society. I have no problem with that being a storyline. But the problem was season three lacked any of the nuance or subtlety of seasons one and two, whereby it was clumsy in how it dealt with culture wars issues. It was really getting into a lecture. It really felt like a long woke lecture, whereas seasons one and two had those elements, but they were more balanced, where you sort of saw both points of view. Even with the left wing tilt, you kind of saw conservative perspectives as well. With season three, it really felt like it could have been written by some students at Berkeley. It was like one big long woke lecture, and it just got a bit tiresome. The action was good. Although Hannah Wells is killed off in a rather silly way. There's a whole subplot in season three of white supremacist eugenics program. I suppose that's plausible, but tapped in with some of the other things that they were lecturing the viewer on, it just felt like pushing an agenda. The character of Isabel Pardo I found incredibly irritating. She is a Latin American Latina intern, and she's a bit more than an intern, she's an advisor. She is the girlfriend of Aiden Panto's character. Um, and he's basically being tipped to be a vice presidential running mate. And he's a smart guy. He's loyal to the president. He's a very capable White House staffer. But she resents the fact that he's kind of integrated into America. He's changed his name to be more anglicized. Real guy was a Mexican actor. She's constantly pushing the fact that she's a proud Puerto Rican, and I just found that she was a very polarizing character because she is basically dictating to her boyfriend how he should identify himself. And she sort of feels like, as the first Latin American vice president, he should be much more proud of his identity. And she's constantly giving him a hard time about this. Now, he even panders to her to an extent. And despite that, there's a scene where he sleeps with Italia Rich's character. So, yeah, he's committed infidelity. Bad. But I have to say, I didn't like the way she treated him. I didn't like the way that she dictated to him as a character. You have to be this, you have to be that. You're a first Latin American, so you must really push hard on the identity politics. There's a storyline, for example, where she's pushing for a pardon for a Puerto Rican activist whose speeches directly led to violence. She wants the guy commuted, and she's lecturing her boyfriend, but he doesn't really go along with it. But he's thinking as as an American, not as a Mexican American. You know, it's sort of like um, maybe I'm not describing this so well, but she is in the White House not as part of the team, as an activist, as someone who's constantly showing that she has a very big chip on her shoulder. I really didn't like her as a character. No, critique of the actress's ability. That's Linda Elena Tovar, although I imagine she'd agree with her character based on what I've seen on her social media. I just found the whole she just came across as very self-righteous, very self-righteous, and carrying a chip on her shoulder, and an aggressive identitarian. Aggressive in the sense of always forcing her views on others in that way. I really didn't like her as a character. Um, Jamie Clayton's character, not quite as vocal or as obnoxious as that, but still, there's an agenda there. So there's a scene, for example, she says to her brother, the president, how do you see me? I don't mean intellectually, but how do you see me? And he honestly says, well, I'm still struggling with it. But the whole angle of that is that you have to just accept the trans narrative unquestioningly, and anyone who thinks otherwise is a bigot. So I feel that something changed between season one and season three because I think had that whole trans storyline been brought into season one, what would have happened is you would have had, certainly a sympathetic portrayal, but you would have also had some nuance. You would have had, for example, maybe someone being fired from the job because they believed in the importance of biological reality. For example, woman working in a women's shelter or something like that. I feel season one would have handled that in a different way. I don't know if they even had different writers for season three. It felt almost like they did, but it was jumbled. There were too many backstories going on. There was some irrelevant backstories. I mean, there was a whole thing where I forget her character's name, but Italia Ricci's character's mother is dying, and that just didn't really seem to lend anything to the flow of the show. It was sad, but it didn't. It just didn't seem to lend anything to the overall. They were just introducing too much tragedy and too much. I just thought season three was jumbled and muddled, and definitely also pushing an agenda. Jumbled and muddled in the sense that there was too many overlapping stories, but it was clear in what it was doing, which was pushing an agenda. So it's a pity because overall, I think Designated Survivor is a good show. I've never seen West Wing or any other similar shows, so I can't really compare it. I haven't seen House of Cards, at least not the American version. I haven't seen I haven't seen West Wing. But Designated Survivor, I think Kiefer Sutherland was in another show called 24, so I might check it out just for comparison if it's on Netflix. Yeah, I think, I have no problem with the sort of things that they were bringing up. I have no problem with civil rights issues being brought up, by racial politics being brought into it, because that is American society. That's realistic. That those are the sort of things that are brought up. But like I say, with season one and season two, they handled it in a more balanced way. Season three just felt like one long woke lecture, and no disrespect to Elena Tovar as an actress, but her character really rubbed me up the wrong way. She was an activist more than a team player. She just, and the way she treated her, there's even a scene where she breaks up with him and she gets into a tearful thing on his big night, incidentally, saying, "You never saw me as a professional," even though he actually panders to her demands. Yeah, and there's a whole sub thread on Reddit talking about her as a character. Um, Anyway, if you are familiar with the show, let me know your thoughts on it. I will say this about Netflix: people do often just dismiss it as all woke propaganda. That's not entirely true. I mean, with Designated Survivor, there was nuance, there was balance, there really was. Um, in the first and second seasons, it didn't portray all conservatives in a negative light. It did show nuances. Um, there was another character, I think the guy's called Tanner Buchanan, if I've got his name right. Fans of Cobra Kai will know him as one of the main characters. I'm also a big fan of Cobra Kai. What is his name? Not Miguel Diaz, the other guy. Anyway, he plays the president's son. He's not so much in the third season because he's went off to university. But if you watch Designated Survival, the chances are, like me, you will see definitely a switch in the tone from season one to season three, and I see why they didn't continue it. But overall, I give Designated Survivor 6.5 out of 10, 8 out of 10 for the first season, perhaps 7 for the second, and no more than 5 for the third. The action was still okay. Kiefer Sutherland still carried it, but I really think season three went downhill. It's a pity. Shows where shows can go wrong if they get too much into lecturing their audience. Oh, I should say this was broadcast between 2016 and 2019, so basically during the duration of the first Trump administration. Okay, I shall wrap this up. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts.